Today we're going over a best of 3 match versus Annie. I'll be using my updated Houston list, so make sure to check out my last video if you haven't already. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so jumping into game 1, there are a few important things to talk about in this matchup. So, first of all, some Annie lists are opening Dreaming Tree and putting in scrap heaps in their side deck, while most Annie lists are probably still on the scrap heaps in the main deck with Zon Warrens game 1. And if that's the case, it is better for us if they do go Zon Warrens. Just because Annie can double dip off Dreaming Tree so many times with, their 2 to 3 copies of Flash, right? So sometimes if you for some reason know what list the Annie's running, if they're going to start Dreaming Tree or Zon Warrens, or if the meta shifts, like if more Annies are just opening Dreaming Tree, then it might be good to actually save Dreaming Tree for like game 2, so you don't let Annie double dip. Because I'll be honest, it is really hard to win if Annie can double dip Dreaming Tree game 1. They'll just farm the draws and they'll just never run out of cards. And yeah. So anyways, in this case, I'm not too sure, so I'm probably still gonna blind Dreaming Tree just because I think it's still less common for Annie to open Dreaming Tree. So yeah, we blind Dreaming Tree this game. And let's get into the mulligan. So there's some really important cards in this matchup as well. And if you don't see any of these cards, you're probably cooked. So the most important card is for sure Gust. Or one of the most important cards. It's maybe not the most important card, but Gust on their merchants or on their deckhands or on Vi in particular, if their only 2-drop is Vi and they have to play Vi, and then you Gust it, their game is basically over, right? They had to recycle a red to play the Vi on their turn 1, and then you Gust it, and then they just basically got nothing from that. The other really important cards are the Sprite cards. So Sprite Call, Sprite Mother are really, really good into Annie. Yes, if they get Gusted, it feels really bad. And you do probably take a huge value and tempo loss, right? Because they just basically just hexagrade your sprite. But if they don't have it, it just trades in their 2-drop, and you're very happy about that. So Gust, Sprites, and Singularity is also a card that I think I've kind of slept on a bit in this matchup. So I would definitely I've considered putting 2 in my main deck just for this matchup. So depending on how common the matchup is in your locals, you could consider running 2 Singularity. It's just really good because before Houston, a lot of Annies weren't running triple flash and a lot of the common builds that were successful at Houston. So if Annie plays triple flash, it's really, really hard to actually kill their units. With Watchers or with a surprise Ember Monk turn, they'll just flash their units back, and the only way to actually kill their Darius, Kaisas ends up being Singularity a lot of the times. So for sure, a super good card in this matchup, and one I would always keep, or even consider adding more. But this is the list that I went over in the video a couple days ago, so it's just going to be the 1 copy of Singularity. But you'll see that it does a good amount of work in this game. So all right, so getting into the mulligan, we've got Retreat, Ember Monk, Stupefy, and Stack Deck. So this is a little bit of a tough mulligan. So Stack Deck is gonna be gone for sure. We just don't really need that card early game, especially with Dreaming Tree. And with Stupefy and Retreat being 2 really good Dreaming Tree cards, it's those will just help us beat our cheap cycle cards instead. So now the question is, do we keep Stupefy or do we keep Retreat? I think in general, I've found myself to run out of cards more often than not have enough runes in this matchup, so I ended up keeping the Stupefy for the option to draw 2 cards with Dreaming Tree down the line. Retreat feels less good if your unit's going to get gusted anyways, which is probably what's going to happen versus Annie. So yeah, I have to take Stupefy here. It also synergizes with Gust. If they play Kaisa, you can just Gust or Stupefy and Gust the Kaisa. So alright, so we draw into another Stupefy and a Sprite Mother. Sprite Mother is really nice to see. Just a Sprite card that we'll probably need. So I end up playing Teemo and passing. So here I'm a little worried if Annie has Deckhand. That can be pretty tough for us here. He plays Poro and passes. So no Deckhand. You like that? Here we're just going to try to attempt to conquer. Even though it might get Gusted or Void Seekered, they're gonna have infinite runes on your turn anyway, so there's no point in not attempting to conquer. Unlike Kaisa, right, where if Kaisa doesn't use leaves up a rune, you probably don't want to try to conquer because you might get hexagrade. But versus Annie, they're gonna have the runes every single turn, so there's literally no point in not trying. And getting gusted is not as bad as just getting the unit deleted, so. Anyways, yeah, Teemo gets gusted. So we just go ahead and play Ember Monk to develop and pass. And he goes Conquer with Poro. Draws 2 off Scrap Heap. Plays Kaisa in base and passes. So at this point, there's like one line that we really want to try, right? Which is the Sprite Mother. For me, it's like we're definitely trying to trade on this Poro, right? And he has 3 runes up, so what that means is either Void Seeker, Gust, Fight or Flight. That's probably the main things, and maybe Flash. Maybe they'll play Flash on their Poro. But otherwise, that's pretty much all we need to play for. So the Sprite, if he gets gusted, it's tragic, right? But it does mean that our Ember Monk will not be able to get Void Seekered, right? Because Annie will only have 2 runes up. So right now, I think I'm just thinking I'm going to send in the Sprite, see if it gets Void Seekered or gusted or whatever, and then after that, Annie won't have the resources to stop the Ember Monk from actually conquering. So let's see what happens. So yeah, I send in the Sprite. Sprite gets Void Seekered, and boom, perfect. Now we can send in our Ember Monk, and Annie stepped out, so nothing really Annie can do here. We take the positive trade on the Poro, go up to 1, and we can start our hold. So I think here I just hide Teemo and pass. I guess, oh, here I'm thinking of if I want to recycle or tap a rune to hide this Teemo. And this is a really important decision because if I tap the Teemo, I will only have the runes to play either a Gust or a Stupefy. And neither of those will really do that much on their own here. The Stupefy might be helpful for if I get Darius cleaved, right? I'll be holding with 10, so that'll make Darius cleave 9. So, you know, Darius cleave won't be able to wipe my board. But otherwise, it's really kind of whatever. So I actually choose to recycle a rune here, even though it's only turn 3. The tempo gain that I'll get from having 2 runes this turn is almost guaranteed to be way better than just, you know, playing a Stupefy to draw a card. Or, you know, maybe playing around Darius Cleave, right? Because if I open 2 runes here, I can play Stupefy Gust on their Kaisa, right? And like Kaisa's for sure going to go to Dreaming Tree here, right? Like Annie cannot just keep doing nothing, or else Annie will just lose the game. So Annie has to send her Kaisa in here, and Stupefy Gust will just bounce back to her hand and pretty much ruin her tempo for the rest of the game. Otherwise, like I'll have runes to play Fight or Flight if, I don't know, they play like Darius Cleave and send the Kaisa to the battlefield the Ember Monk. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about leaving 2 runes up here. So Kaisa goes into the Dreaming Tree, and as I said before, we're just gonna go ahead and Stupefy and Gust the Kaisa. Now Annie is, you know, Annie paid 4 runes for the Kaisa, and she's just probably just gonna have to play the Kaisa again, or just spend a turn to develop, right? So Annie opts to develop. I hold to 2. Here I decide to send Sprite Mother in, even though I know it could get gusted, or it's pretty much it. Maybe Fight or Flighted, I guess. Either of which is not terrible for me. I can react with Stupefy to any of those, so I'd be able to draw 2 cards, and I'd get the Sprite Mother back to my hand, which is pretty good for me, right? Like replaying Sprite Mother is quite good in this matchup. So Annie doesn't play anything, so I just Stupefy to draw 2. Hide the Tide Turner. Hiding the Tide Turner is really important here because not only does it make sure my Ember Monk can get to my Ember Monk, can get to 8 might this turn, but it also means that if Annie chooses to attack Dreaming Tree, I have the option to swap the Ember Monk to just have like a really huge surprise might value on that battlefield and potentially blow the game open. So I have no other development to make this turn, so I just pass and play with 4 runes on Annie's turn. Making it really hard for Annie to do anything here. So another line I thought about here was to play Singularity to kill the Kaisa and the Merchant. But honestly, it just didn't feel like a high value Singularity, and I didn't really want to recycle even more runes, considering I recycled for the Sprite Mother and hiding the Teemo last turn. I kind of want to ramp up to 8 to 10 runes this game, so playing Singularity here would just kind of keep me at 6. for most of the game. So, anyways, so Annie plays her champion unit, brings back a Void Seeker, and Void Seeker's my Sprite Mother. So here I'm just thinking about, I'm definitely gonna retreat the Sprite Mother, but I'm thinking about whether I want to swap the Ember Monk with the Tide Turner. As if I don't swap it, then the only unit that'll be at the Dreaming Tree will be the Tide Turner, which is honestly pretty weak. So if I swap the Ember Monk here, I would make the Dreaming Tree have pretty much 8 might, while the Zon Warrens would go up to 6 might, right? Because it'll be Tide Turner plus Teemo versus just Ember Monk. So I do end up swapping the Monk and the Tide Turner, I believe. And then I tap 1 to play Retreat on the Sprite Mother to ramp a rune and draw a card. And I still have 3 runes to play with here, so I still have the option to play Fight or Flight on one of Annie's units, or to play Ride the Wind if I really need to, like, move my Ember Monk back to Zon Warrens. So let's see what happens. So Kaisa sends in her Merchant into Warrens. I respond with a Gust on the Merchant. And I also do something a little bit interesting and pretty greedy here, honestly. This might have just been a mistake. I end up retreating the Tide Turner in the same showdown to basically just ramp a rune and, you know, go to make sure I'm going to 10 runes next turn, which is a really great breakpoint to be at. But I do think this might have been a mistake because it makes it so I can't cast Fight or Flight if Annie goes Kaisa Cleave, right? And letting Annie get this Conquer off Kaisa, which lets her just draw 2 cards basically, which it's really bad, right? It's a way for Annie to get back in the game. But the reason I did it was I was like, okay, well, if Annie has Kaisa Cleave anyways, then it's gonna hit over this, and I wanted to just ram my rune. And I don't think Annie has it, but I didn't really have a strong logical basis as to why Annie wouldn't have it. So I think this was definitely a mistake. I would have just held the runes for Fight or Flight here. Either way, I didn't go punish, so that's good. I hold to 5 here. And, I mean, this game is pretty much over in my head. Having this large of a point lead versus Annie is just, first of all, it's very uncommon. Second of all, it's just very hard for Annie to come back at this point. So I'm just kind of thinking about how I can reinforce some battlefields again and get an 8 might Ember Monk once again, and just make it very difficult for Annie to play the game. So I end up playing the Sprite Mother to the Warrens, returning Teemo to my hand, and hiding Teemo and the Tide Turner. Another important thing to note here is I recycle 1 rune to hide and I tap 1 to hide. And the reason for this, once again, is the 4 rune breakpoint on my opponent's turn. As you can see in my hand, I have Ride the Wind, Flash, and Fight or Flight. And the most number of runes I'd have after doing all the things I want to do my turn is 5, right? So that means if I tap 2 runes to hide, I would go down to 3. I wouldn't be able to play, you know, 2 of my 2-cost spells, right? I'd only be able to play 1. So it is really important that I chose to recycle 1, so I'd be able to have the option to play any combination of the 2-cost spells, or well, any 2 of the 2-cost spells that I have. Recycling down to 8 is also not bad, right? Once like if you remember from my guide, like having these even number rune breakpoints is really important, like 8, 10, 12. Being at 9 doesn't really matter most of the time. Just because, you know, 8 is like Watcher plus Ride the Wind, Mundo plus Ride the Wind, and, you know, things like that. So, right, so Annie sends her champion unit into Warrens, and this signals to me that Annie is trying to play a Vi this turn, right? Because she's trading to put an extra card in her discard. Yeah, we see the Vi come down after that. Cleave goes on to Vi. So Vi's at 6, and then she's gonna get 7 from her discard, so she'll be at 13? Yeah, 13. So 13 is a pretty tough number. Teemo plus 8 might Ember Monk on the Dreaming Tree is 12 might, so 13 is 1 over that. So Annie ends up going to the Warrens first. Here I think I'm thinking if I want to just fight or flight it, or if I want to swap the Ember Monk, do some sort of shenanigans. But I think here the best thing to just do is to fight or flight the Vi and make the Vi choose which battlefield she'll want to clear, right? Because if we fight or flight it, then Vi can only go to one battlefield instead of being able to clear both. So Vi ends up going to the Ember Monk battlefield, and I'm at 12 with the Monk plus Teemo and the Tide Turner reveal. So there's no real way for me to get over that. I could ride the wind like a sprite over back to the Dreaming Tree, but like I don't want to trade all my units for a Vi. So I end up just playing the Flash to save my Ember Monk and my Teemo, and just play away from the, you know, super overstated Vi for this turn, and hopefully just attack on my turn when Vi's a lot weaker, and go from there. So Annie ends up trying to attack the Warrens. So this is where I'll reveal Tide Turner to swap in the Ember Monk to play around Cleave or, you know, whatever Kaisa might have. So she ends up just flashing both her units back to base and passing. So once again, pretty good for me. Still, you know, was not able to get blown out by Annie. So once again, we're just in a fantastic spot. Like this game, you know, I said it was Raps last turn, but it is like super Raps now. I hold to 6 here, and all I really have to do is hold one battlefield or conquer both next turn. So here I'm just like, okay, this is the turn to play Singularity to really just make Annie's life difficult, right? Taking out the Vi and the Kaisa means Annie needs to basically have either Darius or another Vi Ride the Wind to do anything this turn. But that also means that she's going to spend most of her runes to do that. So I end up conquering both, and I think I just hide 2 cards once again to make my Ember Monk on Annie's turn and just make it impossible for Annie to play the game. So Annie reveals her hand, and yeah, she has a Darius, but that's pretty much it. No pumps or anything, so there's not really much Annie can do. And yeah, that's a wraps for game 1. If you find these videos helpful, a like or a sub lets me know to make more of these. Thanks for watching. So going to game 2, I've kind of updated my sideboarding philosophy a bit versus Annie due to the uptick of rebukes in Annie's main deck and her side deck. I think most lists are running like at least 3 in total, right? Like between main and side. So I think Mundo just becomes such a worse card in this matchup, and it is very rarely going to stick. So I opt to pretty much side them all out if I'm going second. This might be a mistake. I think maybe keeping 1 has some value, right? Like if Annie's low resources, maybe your Mundo will actually stick, but just the fact that you pretty much have to flash or fight or flight your Mundo to save it from rebuke, when in most cases you need your Mundo to actually stick at the battlefield to stop a push from Annie, it just makes Mundo really bad in most cases. So I do opt to side them all out. I also side out my retreats. This could actually be a mistake, considering Annie's probably going to play Dreaming Tree. If they went on Warren's game 1, they're probably playing Dreaming Tree game 2, but they might like switch it up on you and play Arena's Greatest for some reason. So I just side them out to be safe. Just not a very high value card in this matchup, to be honest. So, and I also set up 1 Tide Turner, since we're going to be putting in the Lecturing Yordles in. It makes up for it a little bit. Otherwise, we're putting in the Mega Mech and another Sprite Call. And anything else? Consult the Past and Guerrilla Warfare. Although, honestly, Guerrilla Warfare I also feel like is not amazing in this matchup. It feels good late game when you can bring back your fighter flights, but otherwise, it's like kind of whatever. But I think it's still better than retreats or Mundos. But maybe instead of a Tide Turner, you just leave the Tide Turner in and you don't play the Guerrilla Warfare. But I'll make an updated sideboard guide soon. So. Yeah, going to game 2, we are going second, so we're going to play Bandle Tree, and Annie goes Dreaming Tree, which is expected. So our mulligan here, we get Sprite Call, Stack Deck, Player Flight, or Watcher. So Watcher's for sure going to be going, and since we're going second, it does feel kind of bad to get rid of Fight or Flight, because it is such a good card in this matchup, but in my opinion, like, we just have to play for tempo, or else we're just going to lose. So I end up throwing it away in hopes for like a Raven Bloom or, you know, just even a Tide Turner. The reason we keep Stack Deck is because we're going second. If we end up not finding a Gust turn 1 after we mulligan, then we can at least play stack deck when our opponent goes to score, or like, you know, it doesn't really matter when we play it, but we can at least just fill our curve and use our mana efficiently since we're going second. So we end up drawing into a Ravenbloom and a Rebuke. So the Ravenbloom is really good. It gives us the option to maybe play around Gust depending on the spells we'll have on turn 2. Rebuke is good to have later on, but you know, not very useful for a while. So Annie plays Patty Pour on passes. Tap 2 to play Ravenbloom, pass. And he moves to Conquer with Poro, and I tap 1 to play Stack Deck. We see Stupefy, Guerrilla Warfare, and Tide Turner. So Warfare and Tide Turner are, we already have a Tide Turner, we already have a 2-drop, so we don't really need more. Guerrilla Warfare is just not very useful at this point in the game, so I end up taking Stupefy. And Annie unfortunately gets a deckhand to the other battlefield, so pretty strong start, and pretty, you know, hard for us to deal with. We do thankfully have a Sprite Call, so we're going to go ahead and make a Sprite. Also notably buffs our Ravenbloom to 3. Giving us a positive trade on either battlefield here. So here I'm thinking about if I want to start with the Ravenbloom or the Sprite. Mainly for Gust. If my Sprite gets Gusted, it's pretty bad, but I mean, I plan to try to attack both battlefields this game, so it doesn't, or this turn, so it doesn't really matter if my Sprite gets Gusted, right? Because it would be Gusted either way, so. I'm just kind of thinking if I play the Ravenbloom first and it gets Void Seekered, like, is that better or worse? But yeah, I end up just playing the Sprite because if they do have Void Seeker, I'd much rather this Sprite get Void Seekered over my Ravenbloom. But fortunately, they have the Gust, so. My Sprite dies. I move the Ravenbloom into Tree. I hold my Stupefy in case they have another Gust, so I can fizzle it. But then just flashing their units back to base, So after getting this Conquer, I was considering what I should actually do with the rest of my runes and, you know, how I want to play this turn. It's a little difficult because, yes, I could just hide the Teemo and play around almost everything except Darius Cleave. I could even recycle a rune to hide the Teemo, which means I could hold runes for Butterflight, which would even play around like Darius Cleave, for example. But it does feel a little too... It feels really bad for our runes. I mean, it doesn't leave us with many options on our next turn, as we'll like pretty much just be relying on drawing cards with the Stupefy and our draw for turn, because we don't really have any playable cards after that. So I do a little more greedy play where I Stupefy my Ravenbloom to draw 2 cards and proc Dreaming Tree for this turn, and I believe I tap 1 to hide. Yeah, I tap 1 to hide a Fight or Flight at the Dreaming Tree to potentially either get another Dreaming Tree trigger or to just straight up stop a push if they do play like Darius Cleave or like send in Kaisa, for example. Right, I'll just be able to Fight or Flight that unit and pretty much guarantee the hold, right? Because Deckhand won't be able to swing over it, so. So Annie ends up going with Cleave with the Deckhand. And this is probably the worst case scenario, because Annie still has 5 runes, so she can still play Darius or Kaisa. So if I choose to Fight or Flight the Deckhand, then I can easily get blown over by, yeah, Darius or Kaisa. So I just kind of, I'm forced to play Fight or Flight on my Ravenbloom here. And although that was like kind of one of my options to begin with, it does feel bad if they didn't, because they didn't commit like a mid-sized unit to do it. Yeah, so I do end up firefighting my Ravenbloom, drawing a card. It's not a bad... Value-wise, it's pretty good. We draw a card and we save our unit. But we are just down a lot of points at this point, and giving Annie the points she wants is not great. So here we draw another Sprite, which is quite good. So it's kind of similar to the situation last turn, where I'm like trying to play around Void Seeker and Gust. But this time I have a Gust of my own, so worst case scenario I can Gust my Ravenbloom to save it. So that's why I open with Ravenbloom first. And if she gets gusted, I can just gust the deckhand to get it out of range. So Annie does something a little crazy. Annie actually rebukes my Raven Bloom, which it's kind of absurd, but I understand why. If Annie holds to 6 here, it becomes very hard for Teemo to win, right? Like, Vi Ride the Wind ends us, you know, like, we pretty much have to play for both battlefields for every single turn. Or, well, at least for one, right? Like, we need to at least stock up one battlefield every single turn for the rest of the game if Annie gets to 6 points, or else we just lose. So, and then, yeah, the follow-up gust on the sprite pretty much seals the deal, and it makes sense why Annie rebuked, right? Because if she rebukes this, and then she'll have the rinse for the gust, and then she gets to just kind of stop my entire play this turn. So Annie holds a 6, plays double Vi and passes. So here I'm just kind of thinking, okay, like, I'm pre-cooked. We're gonna move in with Ravenloom and gust the deckhand to give us, you know, 1 might over the Poro, and yep, flash comes out as expected. Draws any card, saves her units. So at this point, my only real hope is to just stack Bandletree as much as possible and hopefully get to a number that the, you know, Vi's and all of the Annie's units can't deal with. I do have a Rebuke, which is really nice here, to pretty much just delete one of the Vi's. So, but the rest of my hand is not great. I have, you know, I'm gonna probably just have to draw with the Yordle and hope and probably hide a Consult the Past and just hope I draw into useful combat spells next turn. So, play the Yordle, draw Flash, which is not great. I end up tapping 1 and recycling 1 for my hidden cards. I honestly probably should have just recycled 2 runes because I'm going to be drawing cards off Consult the Past, so maybe I draw another useful spell, but I know I'm going to be rebuking this turn too, so I don't want to like completely grief my runes, but I probably should have in hindsight. But Annie ends up respecting the runes I have and my board, and just plays Paro to the tree and plays Darius and passes. We do buy ourselves a turn, but we also have to push this Paro off. We could gust it worst case, but I do want to just, you know, use this flash in my hand. It's just basically just a dead card. I'd rather save the gust for the Annie's push on, you know, whenever she decides to push into Bandletree. Right, I can gust a Annie or a deckhand. So yeah, I use flash to move the Raven over. So sadly, I don't have any Ember Monks or anything to develop, but I do have 2 Rebukes, which is pretty insane. So I'm kind of banking on playing double Rebuke and maybe Ride the Wind my Ravenloom onto the Bandletree to defend the attack here. So Annie ends up starting with Gust on my Ravenloom, which is pretty smart by them. Don't really have any way to stop that. Since my 1 unit I wanted to Ride the Wind is now gone, I'm like, when Annie moves in the deckhand, I'm either thinking about Ride the Winding one of my units to contest it, or just gusting it. So I end up playing Ride the Wind on my Teemo, which is currently a 4 might because I just revealed it. And the reason I end up doing this is because Annie can't actually swing over it with the deckhand or the Annie in the base. So Annie has to commit either a Vi or a Darius to actually conquer the Dreaming Tree this turn. So that's the whole reason why I was like, okay, this might actually be pretty good, because that's -1 significant unit that Annie will have to commit to Bandletree this turn. So, however, it does end up getting rebuked, so it doesn't really matter. Goes back to my hand, and Annie conquers Dreaming Tree, draws a card. Annie does something else that's really smart, is she splits the might gain on both of her Vi's. So instead of making one really big Vi, she puts them on both, so I can't get rid of a lot of her might with just 1 rebuke, right? So basically she just makes each of her Vi's 7, and the Darius is 7 as well. So yeah, I do have double rebuke for 2 Vi's, you know, or Darius and Vi, to puts Annie at 10 might total attacking, but I sadly only have 9, so Annie does still swing over my battlefield even with double rebuke. So really unfortunate. Annie goes 8 and wins the game here. So yeah, pretty tough to beat Annie if she draws the answers to all of our cards, right? Like Gust, and, you know, having deckhand on curve is really good as well. So yeah, pretty tough. but we go to game 3. All right, let's jump into game 3. So we'll be going first. So we lost game 2. Cyber philosophy is pretty similar. We're going to take out, I believe, 2 Mundos and 3 Retreat. There's definitely going to be no Dream Retreat in this game, so there's no reason to keep Retreat. And Mundos, once again, just our weakest card. When, Andy's going to run a million Rebukes, so. Our last battlefield is Grove. And let's get into the mulligan. So, we have Watcher, Stack Deck, Sprite Call, Fight or Flight. Since we're going first this game, Stack Deck becomes a lot worse. It's a lot harder to kind of fill the curve with Stack Deck. So, I think the most obvious mulligan here is just get rid of the Watcher and the Stack Deck. Sprite Call and Fight or Flight are both really, really good cards in this matchup, so really good to keep those. And we go on to Ember Monk and Guerrilla Warfare. So Guerrilla Warfare, not very useful early game, but for sure can come into play later on. Either by bringing back Fight or Flights, or even Sprite Call can be good sometimes if you just need another one in the mid game. Alright, so going to our first turn, we do not draw a 2-drop, so we just play our Teemo. And he plays a Merchant. And once again, we're just going to go ahead and test for Gust here. Or Voidseeker, I guess. No real reason not to. Actually, they can't play Voidseeker because they have 3 purple. So the only really thing they can play is Gust, which is not the worst. So yeah, Gust happens. I actually could play Sprite Call here. And maybe try to go into Grove and hide a Teemo. And play for that. But I'm kind of worried if they draw another Gust, or if they just have another Gust, I would just kind of lose the game. So I decided not to go for that. Conquer with Merchant. They play Annie to retrieve the Gust. So I assume they just didn't have anything better to play. Honestly, this play is not very good, but another Gust can definitely be annoying for me. Denies my Sprite Call. So, but it's a lot worse now that I know they have it for sure, right? Like I'm just probably not going to play around Sprite Call. Unfortunately, Annie also just drew more purple runes, so if they have Voidseeker, they can't play it. So I'm not really that scared by sending my Ember Monk in. There's literally nothing Annie can really do here except for Fight or Flight it. So I score the point. And I tap 1 to Gust the Merchant. Now at this point, I'm kind of deciding on whether I want to like hide a Teemo, hide a Consult the Past. What really am I going to do here, right? So one option, if I didn't know for sure that Annie would have Gust or not, is I could play the Sprite Call and go for the Double Conquer and hide Teemo plus Consult the Past for like an insane value turn and pretty much a guarantee hold on the Grove. But since I know she has Gust, that's not really an option. So instead, I decided to be a little greedy. I hide Consult the Past. Since Teemo's bounced, this could definitely be a Teemo, right? I think most people would assume it could reasonably be a Teemo, right? Especially because it's Grove, right? It's like, okay, they want to reinforce and hold this battlefield, right? To get the hold trigger. So I'm kind of playing into that and being a little greedy by hiding Consult the Past, hoping that Annie will think it's a Teemo. And the only real way for Annie to even swing over that is Darius Cleave and sending her Annie in. I have ways around that as well, with Fight or Flight in my hand and Stupefy. And even Sprite Call, right? If Annie taps out to play Darius Cleave, like, she can't Gust my Sprite anymore. So that's one way to squeak out value from the Sprite. So Annie opts to play Sneaky Deckhand. I'm going to just let that happen. And she plays Merchant base and passes. So pretty slow start from Annie. Quite happy with that. I get the hold trigger from Grove. Draw my cards from Consult the Past. Just have a full hand now. I decide the best thing to do here is probably to just play the Mega Mech on curve. The Mega Mech is actually like insanely good here. The only thing Annie can really do to it is Fight or Flight or Rebuke it. Either way, it doesn't feel very bad from us because we didn't pay any runes we didn't recycle any runes to play it, so it's like, yeah, if it gets Rebuke, it kind of sucks, but like, it's not a Mundo, right? Like, you can just play it again and you're not griefing your ramp or anything like that, so. With 3 Fight or Flights in hand as well, it makes me feel more liberally about using them, especially with Guerrilla Warfare in my hand, right? I effectively just have access to 5 Fight or Flights this game if I want to. So I choose to actually hide the Fight or Flight here, in case Annie does actually Rebuke my mech, I can Fight or Flight it back and, use it next turn. Otherwise, Fight or Flight will do really well into like a Darius Cleave or just any accelerated unit Annie will play. So Annie then plays Void Seeker on my Ember Monk. Thankfully I do have the hidden fight or flight here, so I can protect it from the damage, as well as any follow-up attackers or traders, like anything Annie might do to try to take out my Ember Monk. Then Annie drops Draven in base and passes. Okay, so Draven is interesting. Here I'm kind of thinking about what I want to do. I do definitely want to take Arena's Greatest here. I'm just kind of thinking about the best way to do that. So I end up just moving the Ember Monk here. I'm kind of thinking the worst thing that could happen is like a fight or flight, which is fine. And yeah, fight or flight does happen. But now Annie's tapped out, so I can once again safely use my Sprite Call. Even though, I know Annie discarded a Gust, but there's still a chance that Annie has another one. And now that there's no way Annie can Gust my Sprite, pretty happy about this. Get the free trade on the Merchant. Go to 5. Start hiding some cards. Because I have so many spells I can play on my opponent's turn, I end up recycling 1 to hide, just because I want to play my Raven Bloom as well as hide 2 cards, right? Next turn I want to play, for sure, Fight or Flight and probably Rebuke. So I'll need at least 4, which is why I end up recycling 1 instead of tapping down to 3. There's an argument for me recycling 2 runes to leave runes up for Stupefy as well, but I feel like Stupefy won't matter that much on this turn. So that's why I did that. So Annie ends up moving into Ernie's Greatest. I reveal Teemo, and Annie in response gusts my Sprite. So now it's 7 to 4. But I do have the Rebuke and the Fight or Flight, so I end up just using the Fight or Flight here, send the Draven back. Annie then goes in with 5 Might into 4. But I have a Stupefy, so I just end up playing that and forcing a trade situation unless Annie has Cleaves or any other spells. But it does not look like it, so to take that trade here, it's really good for us. And then Annie plays Kai'Sa Accelerated. And passes. So we hold to 6, get the Grove trigger. Grove this game is destroying us so many cards because Annie just unable to retake it ever since like the first turn. So I reveal Fight or Flight to move the mech back to base. This also buffs the Ember Monk to 6. So yeah, I believe I do. Yeah, so I send the Ember Monk in first to like mildly play around Rebuke. I don't really think there's no like pump spells in Annie while defending, at least not this set. So this Ember Monk is pretty safe here. Once again, the worst thing that can happen is like Rebuke or Fight or Flight. Alright, so Annie ends up flashing her Kai'Sa. So we end up going to 7, and we control both battlefields, so it is pretty much a wrap. We have a really insane turn here by playing Guerrilla Warfare, and just getting 2 of our Fight or Flights back. So we got to play 5 Fight or Flights this game, which is insane. So since we only need to hold 1 battlefield, I'm going to go ahead and just stack the one that has the Ember Monk on it. I'll also actually choose not to hide a Fight or Flight here, just because I want to actually hide the Tide Turner in case one of my units gets Fight or Flighted, so I can swap it back in. Right, like the flexibility of leaving Fight or Flight not hidden is pretty good here. The reasons you'd want to hide Fight or Flight is to play around things like Rebuke, but if I get rebuked and returns to my hand, it's kind of the same thing as if I just hid the Fight or Flight and used the Fight or Flight in response to move back to my base, because that unit would just basically be ineffective for that turn. Since I want to win on this turn, I just kind of want to maximize my outs for stopping their push as much as possible on this specific turn. So Annie goes in with 5 Ride the Wind. Luckily for us, we have the Rebuke here. Unless Annie's last card is Flash, there's pretty much nothing Annie can do here. So yeah, Rebuke goes off, flies back to hand, and this is pretty much game. Annie tries to go in with Draven, Fight or Flight it. Annie tries to go in with Kai'Sa, Fight or Flight it, and yep, that's game. So a few notes from this BO3 as a whole and some more testing versus Annie, especially post Houston, Mundo is for sure one of your weaker cards. And I think the main way you win this matchup is just playing for tempo and trying to lock them out of at least one battlefield for as long as possible. Preventing Annie from scoring both just really slows the game down and lets you play a lot more to your better outs like Rebuke, Fight or Flights, Ember Monks, things like that. Another really interesting thing to note is I think Annie's game 3 is really weak. So if you manage to win one of the first 2 games, I think you're in a really good position to just win the best of 3 overall, because Annie without Dreaming Tree or Dawn Warrens just feels really, really weak. Like, she just draws no cards. Unless she really high rolls her opener, like, if you ever manage to stabilize, I think it's just really easy to just take good trades on her and make her run out of cards. So, otherwise, the really important cards, like I said, are the Sprite cards, Gust, Singularity. I might end up putting an extra Singularity in my main deck, especially just for this matchup, because I've noticed how good it really can be to help play around the increase in flash usage from this deck. So, hey guys, thanks again for watching the whole video. Please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. As always, feel free to ask any questions in the comments below. Otherwise, happy holidays, and I'll see you guys in the next one.